Donovan Pierce was 39 years old, and he had spent every one of those years learning the same lesson his grandfather had pressed into him on a Sunday morning over a workbench in the garage, sawdust settling on both their shoulders like confetti at a party nobody else had been invited to. "A man who needs applause," the old man had said, tapping a nail flush with a single clean strike, "has already lost. Build so solid the house speaks for itself." Donovan had taken that instruction literally. He was a structural engineer who had quietly risen through a mid-sized firm in Charlotte, North Carolina, and then, 4 years ago, launched his own consulting practice from a rented office above a barbershop that smelled permanently of sandalwood and hot combs. He coached his 5-year-old son's t-ball team on Saturday mornings with the patient intensity of a man who understood that showing a child how to keep his elbow up was, in the final accounting, more important than any load-bearing calculation he had ever run. He packed lunches with handwritten notes tucked inside the sandwich bag. He never missed a single bedtime, not once. Not for a deadline, not for a client dinner, not for anything that could not look his son in the eye and explain why it mattered more. He was the kind of man people described not by what he said, but by what he consistently, quietly did. And then, on a Thanksgiving evening in his mother-in-law's dining room, between the candied yams and the pecan pie, his wife stood up, lifted a champagne glass, and announced to 23 members of their extended family that she was leaving him, that she had already retained an attorney, that she expected the house, the car, full custody of their son, and half the consulting practice he had built with his own hands. She smiled when she said it, the particular smile of a person who has rehearsed a scene so many times she has stopped considering the possibility that the ending might not go the way she wrote it. She had not considered it, because what Shayla Hargrove Pierce did not know, what she had fundamentally failed to account for, was that Donovan had spent the last 5 months constructing something she never once suspected existed. Something meticulous, documented, and entirely invisible to her. And by the time she set that champagne glass back down on the tablecloth, every piece was already in position. But this story needs to begin where it actually started. Before we continue, if you believe that quiet men deserve to be heard, that patience is not the same thing as weakness, and that the truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds its moment, go ahead and subscribe to this channel. This one will stay with you. Donovan met Shayla at a friend's cookout in the summer of 2016. She arrived 40 minutes late, which she announced as though it were a personality trait rather than a choice, and spent the rest of the afternoon making everyone within earshot laugh hard enough to forget they had been annoyed. She was magnetic in the way that certain people are. Not because they give you their full attention, but because they make you feel as if their partial attention is a gift worth competing for. Psychologists call this intermittent reinforcement, the unpredictable reward cycle that slot machines and charismatic narcissists share in common. Donovan did not have that framework at the time. He had a plate of ribs and a growing certainty that the woman across the yard was the most interesting person he had ever met. They married 14 months later. Isaiah came 2 years after that. A boy with his father's wide-set eyes and the particular gravity of a child who watches everything twice before deciding what he thinks about it. By the time Isaiah turned 3, Donovan had built the consulting practice into something real, not flashy, solid, the kind of business that earned referrals through reputation rather than marketing, because every bridge Donovan signed off on did exactly what it was supposed to do, which is, when you think about it, the most extraordinary thing an ordinary structure can accomplish. Shayla, during those years, managed the social architecture of their life with visible enthusiasm and invisible resentment. She planned the dinner parties. She curated the family photos. She maintained the particular public performance of a marriage that looks, from every external angle, like something worth envying. And she spent money at a rate that Donovan noticed mentioned twice, and then stopped mentioning, because the third mention would have started a fight, and Donovan had been raised to believe that peace in a household was a structural necessity, not a luxury. His grandfather would have called it load-bearing. Donovan called it love. He was wrong about that. But he would not know how wrong for another 18 months. The first fracture appeared in June, 5 months before that Thanksgiving dinner, on a Tuesday morning so ordinary that Donovan would later marvel at how the most consequential moments of a life rarely bother to announce themselves. He was at his desk reviewing a foundation report when his phone buzzed. A forwarded email from the family's shared cloud account, the one they used for photos and school documents, and the slow digital accumulation of a shared life. The notification was routine. A new folder had been synced. He opened it without thinking. What he found was a thread of messages between Shayla and a man named Terrell Morrison. Not ambiguous, not open to interpretation. Explicit in language, specific in dates, and precise in its references to Donovan's finances. One message, sent 3 weeks prior, read, "Once the practice gets the DOT contract in the fall, that's the window. File right after. Half of everything plus the house. My attorney says timing is everything." Donovan read the thread once. He closed the laptop. He sat at his desk for 11 minutes without moving. His hands were flat on the surface, the way a man places his hands when he is deciding, consciously and deliberately, not to break something. Psychologists describe this as the freeze response, the nervous system's third option when neither fight nor flight maps onto the situation. Donovan was not frozen in the clinical sense. He was recalibrating, recalculating the load on a structure he had believed was sound, and discovering, with the cold clarity of an engineer reading a stress report, that the foundation had been compromised for a long time. He did not confront her. This is the detail that matters most, because the instinct to confront, to shout, to demand an explanation in the kitchen at 11 o'clock at night, that instinct is not strength. It is pressure seeking the nearest exit, and Donovan had been trained, by his grandfather, by his profession, by every quiet year of his life, to never let pressure choose the exit for him. That evening, he brought home takeout from the Thai place Shayla liked. He asked about her day. He helped Isaiah build a Lego fire truck on the living room floor, a project that required 17 minutes and 4 engineering compromises that would have made any structural review board deeply uncomfortable, but that Isaiah declared the best one yet. He tucked his son in at 8:15, read 2 full chapters of a book about a dog who solved mysteries, despite the dog's investigative methods being, at best, questionable. And after the house went quiet, he sat in his parked car in the garage for 40 minutes with the engine off, staring at the wall where he had hung Isaiah's first finger painting 2 years ago, a red and yellow explosion that Isaiah had titled Daddy's Building and that Donovan had framed in actual glass because some things deserve to be treated as though they are exactly what their creator intended them to be. The next morning, he called Nathaniel Cross. Nathaniel was a family attorney in Charlotte whose reputation had been built on 2 qualities that rarely coexist in the same person: genuine compassion for the families moving through his office, and a methodical, almost architectural precision in how he built a case. He did not grandstand. He did not bluff. He constructed arguments the way Donovan constructed buildings, with every load accounted for and every joint tested before a single wall went up. Their first meeting lasted 90 minutes. Donovan brought the cloud folder screenshots, printed and time-stamped. Nathaniel read them with the particular stillness of a man who has seen this exact pattern before and has stopped being surprised by it, but has never stopped being offended. "How long do you think the affair has been going on?" "I don't know. The messages go back at least a year. And the financial references. She's discussed your business valuation with this person?" "In detail. She mentioned the DOT contract before I had told her it was confirmed." Nathaniel set the papers down. He looked at Donovan the way an engineer looks at a blueprint that has just revealed a critical flaw. Not with panic, with focused, professional attention. Here is what I need you to understand. If she files first, and she controls the narrative, and she presents herself as the primary caretaker of your son, the default assumptions of family court will work in her favor. That is the reality. If you want a different outcome, you need to build a record that makes the truth impossible to dispute. And you need to do it without alerting her that anything has changed. Donovan nodded once. I can build quietly. It's what I do. Over the next 5 months, Donovan assembled a case file with the same discipline he brought to every engineering project. He documented the affair through the shared cloud account, which Shayla never thought to disconnect because it had never occurred to her that her husband might actually look. He tracked financial discrepancies, credit card charges at restaurants in cities where she had no stated business, hotel bookings on nights she claimed to be visiting her college roommate in Raleigh. He recorded 3 conversations in which Shayla discussed, openly and without apparent concern, the timing and logistics of the divorce she was planning. North Carolina is a one-party consent state. Every recording was legal. Every file was backed up in triplicate and stored with Nathaniel's office. Through all of it, he maintained the surface of their life with meticulous care. He brought coffee to her nightstand every morning. He attended her cousin's baby shower and made small talk with people who would, within a few months, have to choose which version of this story they believed. He sat beside her at Isaiah's school concert and clapped when Isaiah waved from the second row of the children's choir, wearing a clip-on tie that was already at a 45-degree angle before the first song began, and had achieved full horizontal by the third. At home, he was everything Isaiah needed. The constant, steady, uninterrupted presence that developmental psychology identifies as the single most predictive factor in a child's long-term well-being. Not the grand gestures, the ordinary ones, the reliable ones. Breakfast at the same time every morning, a specific bedtime ritual involving 2 stories, 1 prayer, and a formal goodnight handshake that Isaiah had invented at age 4 and now considered legally binding. Saturday mornings at the batting cage, where Isaiah's swing was improving in increments, so small they were invisible to anyone who was not watching every single time, which Donovan was. One night, sitting on the edge of Isaiah's bed after the stories and the handshake, Donovan looked at his son's face in the glow of the dinosaur nightlight. Isaiah was fighting sleep the way children do, with a kind of principled resistance, as though staying awake were a civic duty. "Dad? Yeah, buddy. How come you always come home?" Donovan felt the question land somewhere behind his ribs. The place where the things you carry but never mention tend to settle. "What do you mean?" "Tyler at school said his dad doesn't always come home. I told him you always do." Donovan smoothed the blanket, took a breath that he made sure sounded easy. "I come home because this is where I'm supposed to be. There's nowhere else I'd rather go." Isaiah considered this with the seriousness of a 5-year-old evaluating a major philosophical claim. He nodded once, as though the answer had passed review. "Okay. Good night, Dad." "Good night, buddy." Donovan sat in the hallway after the door was closed and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes until the pressure stopped the tears. Not because he was ashamed of them, but because he had 3 more hours of work to do that night, backing up files, reviewing evidence, and preparing for a future his son did not yet know was coming, and he needed to be precise. The second piece of the picture arrived in October, 6 weeks before Thanksgiving, and it came from the last person Donovan would have expected. Shayla's older cousin, Paige, had always occupied a specific role in the family. She was the one who remembered everyone's birthday without a calendar, who showed up early to set tables and stayed late to wash dishes, who moved through family gatherings with the quiet efficiency of someone whose contributions were essential and almost entirely unacknowledged. She called Donovan on a Wednesday afternoon. Her voice was low and tight, the voice of a person who has been arguing with herself for weeks and has finally lost. "I need to tell you something, And I need you to know that I wouldn't be calling if I had any other choice." They met at a park 2 towns over. Paige brought a folder of printed screenshots from a group text she had been added to by accident, a thread between Shayla and 2 friends in which the Thanksgiving announcement was discussed in specific, strategic detail. The plan was laid out with the clinical precision of a business proposal. Shayla would make the announcement publicly, in front of the full family, to establish witnesses and create a narrative of a woman bold enough to leave. Terrell Morrison was referenced by name. His role, as described in the messages, was to assume residency in the family home within 30 days of filing. Paige's hands shook as Donovan read. "She's my blood," Paige said quietly. "But that little boy is 5 years old, and what she's doing to you, to him, it's not something I can watch happen and stay quiet about. Not anymore." Donovan folded the papers. He looked at her for a long moment. "You understand what this means. For you and her, for the family. I understand." A pause. "Some things matter more keeping the peace." Donovan recognized the sentence. It was the inverse of everything he had been taught, and he understood, sitting on that park bench with the October wind pulling at his jacket, that Paige was right, that there were situations where keeping the peace was itself a form of structural failure. He forwarded everything to Nathaniel that evening. By the first week of November, the case file was complete. Nathaniel reviewed it across 2 full days and called Donovan on a Friday evening. "This is one of the most thoroughly documented cases I have handled in 14 years. I want you to know that." "What's the strategy?" "We let her go first. We let her make the public declaration she's planning. In front of witnesses, on the record. And then we file the next business day with everything we have. Her own words, her own plan, her own timeline, all of it. And custody. Given the documentation, the recordings, and the testimony your wife's cousin is prepared to offer, I believe we will be in an exceptionally strong position. But Donovan, I have to be direct with you. Nothing is guaranteed in family court. The only thing I can promise is that the truth will be in the room. What the judge does with it is up to the judge." "That's enough," Donovan said. "If the truth is in the room, I'll take my chances." Thanksgiving Day arrived the way significant days always do, disguised as an ordinary one. The sky over Charlotte was low and gray, the air carrying the particular sharpness that November brings to the Piedmont, not quite cold enough for a heavy coat, but insistent enough that you notice it every time you step outside. Shayla's mother's house was a brick colonial on a tree-lined street in the Eastover neighborhood. The kind of home that had hosted every major family occasion for 3 decades and wore its history in the particular way that long-lived houses do, in the scuff marks on the hardwood, in the water stain on the dining room ceiling that had been there since 1994 and had achieved the status of a family landmark. 23 people gathered that evening. Aunts, uncles, cousins, a grandmother in a wheelchair who had opinions about the turkey and no interest in keeping them private. The children were released into the backyard like a small, cheerful invasion force. Isaiah found a football and organized a game with 3 cousins, appointing himself quarterback, head coach, and referee, a consolidation of power that none of the other children appeared to contest. Donovan stood on the back porch watching him, a glass of iced tea in his hand, his phone in his pocket, set to record. He had tested the recording function 3 times that morning. He was calm, the specific calm of a man who has already made every decision that matters and is now simply waiting for the sequence to reach the point that requires his presence. He looked at Isaiah running across the yard. The boy turned, saw his father watching, and waved with the unself-conscious joy of a child who has never had reason to question whether the person watching will still be there when he looks again. Donovan waved back. That wave, he would later say, was the moment he knew with absolute certainty that every quiet, painful, disciplined month had been worth it. Dinner was served at 6. The table was a landscape of family tradition. Collard greens, mac and cheese, cornbread from a recipe that had never been written down, and was transmitted orally from grandmother to granddaughter with the solemnity of a state secret. Shayla's father carved the turkey with the deliberate ceremony of a man who regarded the task as a yearly performance and intended to be judged favorably. Grace was said. Plates were filled. The room settled into the particular warmth of a large family sharing a meal, voices overlapping, laughter arriving in waves, children kicking each other under the table with the casual violence of the deeply comfortable. Donovan ate slowly. He complimented the greens. He listened to Shayla's uncle tell a story about a fishing trip in 1997 that had been told at this table at least 11 times before and had improved with each telling. He watched Shayla at the far end of the table, registering the precise moment she set down her fork and reached for her champagne glass. The tell was in her posture. A straightening of the shoulders, a lift of the chin, the particular physical preparation of a person about to deliver a line she has been rehearsing. And psychologists would note the micro-expression of what Paul Ekman classified as duping delight, the involuntary flash of pleasure that crosses the face of someone who believes they are about to successfully deceive. She stood. She tapped the glass with a knife. The room quieted in that immediate, attentive way families do when someone stands at the table, not because they know what is coming, but because the gesture itself demands a pause. "I have an announcement." She said it with the bright, practiced confidence of a keynote speaker. Every face turned toward her. "Donovan and I have had a wonderful run, but I've decided it's time for me to move forward. I've already spoken with an attorney. I'll be filing for divorce. I expect the house, the car, primary custody of Isaiah, and a fair share of the business." She paused, allowing the room to absorb the impact. Her eyes moved to Donovan, searching perhaps for the collapse she had expected, the shock, the anger, the public unraveling that would make her appear, by contrast, composed and reasonable. Instead, she found something she had not rehearsed for. Donovan was looking at her with an expression that contained no surprise whatsoever. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and removed a single folded sheet of paper. He set it on the table beside his plate with the unhurried precision of a man placing the final piece of a structure he had been building for a very long time. "Check your email, Shayla, right now, before anyone at this table says another word." The room held its breath, the specific collective breath hold of 23 people who have all simultaneously realized that the scene unfolding in front of them is not the one they were told to expect. Shayla's smile flickered, not gone, but destabilized. She pulled her phone from the pocket of her dress, her movement still carrying the residual confidence of her rehearsed script. She opened her email. She read the first paragraph. The smile did not fade. It broke, the way a load-bearing wall breaks when the force exceeds its capacity. Not gradually, all at once. Total structural failure. Her face went through 3 distinct phases in approximately 5 seconds. Confusion, recognition, and then a pale, still expression that people who work in crisis psychology call affective flattening. The nervous system's emergency shutdown when the incoming information exceeds the brain's capacity to process it in real time. The phone slipped from her hand. It landed on the tablecloth beside the gravy boat. Screen up, visible. Her mother leaned forward. "Shayla, what is that? What did you do?" It was not a question. It was the specific vocal register of a mother who has just understood something about her daughter that she had spent years choosing not to see. What was in that email, what Nathaniel Cross had sent at 5:47 p.m. that evening, timed to arrive precisely when Donovan signaled with a single-word text, was this: a fully prepared divorce petition, drafted, signed, and ready for filing at the Mecklenburg County Courthouse at 8:30 a.m. the following Monday. 5 months of documented evidence. Dates, locations, financial records, and a detailed timeline of the affair with Tyrell Morrison, cross-referenced against Shayla's stated whereabouts on each corresponding date. 3 audio recordings. Shayla's own voice in her own home, discussing the divorce strategy with a specificity that left no room for reinterpretation. One recording in particular would prove decisive. In it, she said clearly and without ambiguity, "Isaiah is my insurance policy. As long as I have custody, Donovan pays. The kid is the leverage. That's how this works." And at the very bottom, a single line from Nathaniel's office. "Emergency motion for temporary primary custody of Isaiah Pierce, filed and ready for submissions. All supporting documentation attached. Sworn affidavit from Paige Hargrove enclosed." Donovan stood, not quickly, not with any flourish, with the measured, upright posture of a man who has been sitting with a weight on his shoulders for 5 months and is now, finally, setting it down. "Everything you just announced," he said, his voice level, controlled, entirely absent of performance, "I have known about for 5 months. Every conversation, every plan, every lie. You believed you were controlling this, you were not, and what you just did, in front of every person at this table, with witnesses present, was confirm publicly, on a recorded evening, exactly what my attorney needed to establish the pattern of intent." He looked around the table once, not for approval, not for sympathy, with the steady gaze of a man who has built his case and no longer requires anyone else's reaction to validate it. "I love my son. I have always loved my son, and I will be there for him every morning for the rest of his life. That is not a negotiation." He buttoned his jacket, picked up his phone, walked to the front door. Behind him, the dining room erupted in the particular chaos that families produce when a shared understanding collapses simultaneously for every person in the room. Voices climbing over each other. A chair pushed back too hard. Shayla's mother standing in the kitchen doorway with her hand over her mouth. Shayla's father sitting motionless at the head of the table, his carving knife still in his hand, staring at the spot where Donovan had been sitting with the expression of a man rewriting a story he thought he had already finished. Outside, the November air was cool and still. Donovan sat in his car for 2 full minutes. He did not turn on the engine. He did not call anyone. He placed both hands on the steering wheel and closed his eyes and breathed. The particular breath of a man who has just walked through something he has been preparing for and is now on the other side of it, not triumphant, not broken, just through. He called Nathaniel. "It's done." She made the announcement, publicly, full family present. "Recording is clean. Filing goes in Monday morning. Get some rest this weekend." The hearing will be scheduled within 2 weeks. Donovan drove to the hotel he had booked. A clean room, a quiet view of the parking lot. He ordered a sandwich from the front desk and ate it sitting on the bed with the television off. He did not feel victorious. He did not feel vindicated. He felt the specific bone-deep exhaustion that follows the end of sustained vigilance. The body, when it finally understands that the emergency is over, does not celebrate. It simply stops, holds itself together quite so tightly, and lets the tiredness arrive all at once. Back at the house on the tree-lined street, the Thanksgiving table sat uncleared. Shayla called Terrell Morrison 4 times before midnight. He answered once. Briefly. The conversation lasted less than 90 seconds. When it was over, she sat on the front porch steps in the cold and did not go back inside for a long time. Psychologists describe the moment when a person's carefully constructed false narrative collapses under the weight of external reality as narcissistic injury. It is not grief. It is the disorientation of someone who has confused their story about the world with the world itself, and has just discovered, irreversibly, that the two are not the same thing. The hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday in December. The courtroom was on the 3rd floor of the Mecklenburg County Courthouse, a room with fluorescent lighting and institutional carpet, and the particular atmosphere of a space where difficult truths are spoken every day, and the architecture has absorbed them into its walls. Judge Evelyn Marsh presided, 57 years old, 19 years on the family court bench, and a reputation among Charlotte attorneys that could be summarized in a single observation. She read everything before she entered the room, and she had never once been successfully surprised by anything that happened after she sat down. Nathaniel presented the case with the precision Donovan had come to expect from him. The timeline, the financial documentation, the recordings, each element placed before the court in sequence, the way an engineer presents a structural report. Facts first, interpretation second, conclusion last. The recording played through the courtroom speakers. Shayla's voice, clear and unmistakable. "Isaiah is my insurance policy. As long as I have custody, Donovan pays. The kid is the leverage." The courtroom went quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when something has been said that cannot be unsaid. Paige Hargrove was called to testify. She entered through the side door in a gray cardigan, her hands clasped in front of her, looking smaller than she usually did, as if the weight of what she was about to do had physically compressed her. She spoke carefully. She described the group text. She described the plan. She described the moment she realized that her loyalty to her cousin could not coexist with her conscience and that one of them would have to give way. Near the end of her testimony, her voice broke. She talked about that boy the way you talk about an asset on a balance sheet. Not like a child, like collateral. And I watched Donovan with him. I watched him pack lunches and tie shoes and show up every single day, every single one. And I couldn't be part of taking that away from Isaiah. I just couldn't. Judge Marsh looked at the documentation for a long time. When she spoke, her voice carried the practiced clarity of a person who understands that her words will be entered into a record and will outlast the moment in which they are spoken. This court has reviewed extensive evidence demonstrating a sustained and deliberate pattern in which the respondent treated the minor child as a strategic asset in the planning of a financially motivated divorce proceeding. The respondent's own recorded statements establish that the child's custody was conceived not as a parental responsibility, but as financial leverage. This court does not take that characterization lightly. The rulings followed. Temporary primary custody of Isaiah Pierce, granted to Donovan Pierce, effective immediately. Supervised visitation for Shayla Pierce, limited to 4 hours per week at a court-designated facility. Alimony petition denied pending full trial. A guardian ad litem appointed to represent Isaiah's independent interests. Donovan sat through each ruling without moving. Not because he was unmoved, because he had learned over 5 months of building in the dark that the appropriate response to a foundation holding is not celebration. It is the quiet recognition that the work was done correctly and the structure will stand. Outside the courthouse, the December sky was sharp and clear, the way winter skies are in Charlotte when the wind comes from the west and pushes every cloud to somewhere else. Donovan drove directly to Paige's house, where Isaiah had spent the morning. He knocked. The door opened. Isaiah appeared at full velocity, a 40-pound projectile in a striped sweater, arms outstretched, sneakers pounding the hallway floor. "Dad!" Donovan dropped to one knee and caught him. He held on. The grip of a man who understands, with total clarity, the precise distance between what he has and what he nearly lost. "Hey, buddy, I'm right here." "I know," Isaiah said, with the uncomplicated certainty of a child who has never had reason to doubt that particular fact. "You always are." 3 months later, Shayla violated the custody order. She appeared at Isaiah's school on a Tuesday afternoon, without authorization, without prior arrangement, and without, it appeared, any consideration of the fact that the school's front office maintained a legal file on Isaiah that included the court order in a clearly marked folder. The receptionist checked the file. She called Donovan. Donovan called Nathaniel. Nathaniel filed an emergency motion before the school day ended. The second hearing was brief. Judge Marsh reviewed the violation with an expression that people who have spent time in her courtroom recognized immediately. The expression of a woman who had issued a clear instruction and was now observing that it had been disregarded. Full permanent custody was granted to Donovan Pierce. Supervised visitation was suspended pending a formal review. Shayla was advised that any further unauthorized contact would be treated as contempt. The divorce was finalized on a quiet morning in March. Donovan signed the papers in Nathaniel's office with a cup of coffee at his elbow, and the sound of traffic 3 floors below, the ordinary machinery of a city that did not know or care that a man in a 3rd-floor office had just closed a chapter of his life that had cost him more than he had expected to pay, and returned to him exactly the thing he had been unwilling to lose. Nathaniel shook his hand. "You handled this better than almost anyone I've worked with. I want you to know that." Donovan considered the window. The bare trees along the street were just beginning to show the earliest suggestions of green. "I had something worth protecting. That simplifies the decisions." The spring that followed was quiet in the way that recovery is quiet, not empty, resting. Donovan and Isaiah settled into the rhythm of their new life, with the gradual, imperfect ease of 2 people learning the shape of a house that is smaller than the one they left, but feels, in ways that matter, more solid. Donovan's cooking improved from survival grade to respectable. Isaiah rated each meal on a scale of 1 to 10 with the blunt honesty of a 5-year-old food critic. Spaghetti, 7. Grilled cheese, 9. The experimental stir-fry, 4, accompanied by a facial expression that communicated the remaining 6 points more effectively than any verbal review could have. They developed routines. Saturday mornings at the batting cage. Sunday pancakes shaped like animals, a category that included, according to Isaiah, a bear, a dragon, and something Isaiah called a mystery creature, which Donovan suspected was simply the result of pouring too much batter, but which he accepted without challenge. A bedtime ritual that had expanded to include 2 stories, the formal handshake, and a new addition. A brief period in which Isaiah reported the day's events to a stuffed elephant named Professor, who sat on the nightstand and received these briefings with the dignified silence of a tenured academic. 6 months after the divorce, Donovan met a woman named Ania at a neighborhood volunteer build for Habitat for Humanity. He had nearly stayed home that morning. The fatigue of the past year had settled into his bones in a way that made even simple social interactions feel like they required more energy than he had available. But Isaiah had been invited to a birthday party that afternoon, and the empty house felt like the kind of quiet that does not restore, but simply sits there, waiting for you to fill it with something you are not yet ready to name. So he went. Ania was 31, a pediatric speech therapist, with an opinion about every book she had ever read and a laugh that arrived without permission and left the room slightly different than it had been before she started. She handed Donovan a hammer and said, "You look like you know what you're doing with that." He did. They worked side by side for 3 hours. She asked about Isaiah. He told her, not the court version, the real version. The Saturday pancakes and the batting cage and the way Isaiah said, "Good night, Dad," every evening with the same inflection, the same small pause before Dad, as though the word itself was something he liked the taste of and wanted to hold in his mouth for just a moment before letting it go. Ania met Isaiah on a Saturday afternoon at the park near the house. Isaiah studied her with the solemn, unblinking evaluation that children reserve for people they sense might become important. After approximately 3 minutes, he asked whether she knew anything about dinosaurs. She named her top 5, ranked by scientific interest, and then added a 6th that she described as underrated. Isaiah approved. That was the beginning. 8 months after the divorce, Donovan saw Shayla one more time, a Sunday afternoon at the hardware store. He was in the paint aisle with Isaiah, who was lobbying with considerable passion for a shade of blue that the manufacturer had named Cosmic Ocean, and that Isaiah had decided was the only acceptable color for his new bedroom. Donovan was reviewing the paint chip with the professional skepticism of a man who understood that colors on small cards bore only a theoretical relationship to colors on actual walls when he heard his name. He looked up. She was thinner, quieter in a way that had nothing to do with volume and everything to do with the particular reduction that occurs when a person's self-constructed narrative has been dismantled and they have not yet built a new one. She held a single item, a package of light bulbs. She was alone. Donovan. Shayla. A pause that contained everything that had happened between them and everything that had not been said about it. I'm not asking for anything. I know I don't have the right. I just need you to hear that I'm sorry. Not because of the court. Because of what I did to you. And to him. She glanced at Isaiah, who had returned his full attention to Cosmic Ocean, and was now arranging 3 paint chips in order of preference with the methodical intensity of a gallery curator. Donovan looked at her. There had been months when the thought of her could still press against something tender, when the memory of what she had said in that recording could arrive without warning and take the air out of a perfectly good afternoon. But those months had passed. Somewhere in the accumulation of packed lunches and Saturday mornings and the slow daily work of being present for a boy who trusted him completely, the wound had closed. Not because she had earned his forgiveness, but because carrying the anger had started to take up space that belonged to something better. I'm not angry anymore. I need you to know that, not for your sake, for his. He deserves a father who isn't carrying that. So I put it down. She nodded. Her jaw worked in the way of a person holding something back in a public aisle of a hardware store. Is he okay? He's wonderful. He's the best thing I've ever been part of. He looked at Isaiah one more time. The boy had selected Cosmic Ocean as the final answer, and was now holding the paint chip up to the overhead light to confirm his decision under different lighting conditions, a level of due diligence that Donovan found both excessive and deeply admirable. Take care of yourself, Shayla. He meant it. He turned the cart toward the register. That night, after dinner, after the bath, after 2 stories, and the handshake, and the formal briefing of Professor the Elephant on the day's events, which included a detailed account of the paint selection process, and a strong recommendation that Professor consider repainting his own habitat, Donovan sat on the edge of Isaiah's bed. The room was lit by the glow of a nightlight shaped like a baseball. Isaiah was nearly asleep, one hand resting loosely around 2 of Donovan's fingers, the same grip he had used since the first night in the hospital. When he was 7 pounds and 4 ounces and the entire world had rearranged itself around his arrival without asking anyone's permission. Donovan sat in the quiet for a long time. The house settled around them. The sound of Ania in the kitchen, putting away the last of the dishes, the creak of the porch, the distant sound of a neighbor's dog barking once and then thinking better of it. He leaned down, barely above a whisper. You are the reason I got back up every time it would have been easier to stay down. Not because I had to, because there was nowhere on this earth I would rather be than right here, building this. With you. Isaiah breathed on, steady and deep, held entirely by sleep. Donovan smiled. The quiet kind. The kind that belongs to a man who built his foundation in the dark, piece by careful piece, when no one was watching and nothing was certain, and who is now, at last, living inside what he built. For anyone listening today, who has been patient when patience felt like punishment, who has stayed steady when the ground shifted, who has kept showing up for someone small who needed them to be there, know this. The work you are doing in the ordinary moments, the lunches you pack, the stories you read, the mornings you show up when it would be easier not to, that is the most durable thing a human being can build. No one can take it from you, not ever. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Tears and Secrets so you never miss the next one. Real people wrote these scripts with passion and purpose to spark reflection and change. AI was merely a helpful tool that polished the delivery, making sure profound messages about respect, redemption, and human dignity reached as many hearts as possible.